Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something fascinating in the world of large language models: fine-tuning. We often hear about making these models align with human preferences, but how does that actually happen step by step?
That's the core question. And, most analysis looks at the final result or maybe the connection to reinforcement learning.
Right, like judging the cake without seeing how it was baked.
Exactly. But we're digging into a new paper that takes a totally different approach. It looks at the dynamics.
Dynamics, so like how the model's predictions literally change with each tiny training update.
Precisely. How things evolve. And this viewpoint, it turns out, helps explain some really weird things.
Weird things, like what?
Well, like why LLMs sometimes repeat themselves endlessly or hallucinate things.
Uh-huh.
Or, and this is a big one, why sometimes during training, especially with a method called DPO, the model seems to become less confident about everything.
Less confident, even about the answers it's supposed to be learning.
Yeah, even the preferred answer sometimes. It's counterintuitive, but this dynamical view gives us a handle on it, and maybe even a way to fix it.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's unpack this idea of learning dynamics. What does that actually mean in practice?
Okay, so think about it simply. You have a model, and you feed it one training example. Let's call it view.
Right, like a prompt and a good answer.
Exactly. And the model processes this through gradient descent, makes a tiny update. The core idea is to track how that one update changes the model's prediction for some other output. Let's call that Gus.
So how learning about Jew affects what it thinks about goo, like ripples in a pond.
That's a great analogy. And the paper breaks down that ripple effect into three main components.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's the adaptation factor, ECD. That's basically just reflecting the model's current probabilities, its existing beliefs.
Makes sense. What else?
Second, the similarity measure, KD&T, this is crucial. It's also called the empirical neural tangent kernel, or ENTK.
Whoa, okay. Technical term. What does it do?
It measures how similar the training example U is to the other example T, but from the model's internal perspective. If KT is large, updating on ZU is going to strongly influence XO.
So if the model thinks two things are similar, learning about one heavily impacts the other.
You got it. And the third piece is the adaptation energy. GT, this comes from the loss function. It provides the oomph and the direction for the change.
The energy to push the prediction towards the target.
Exactly. Pushing from where the model is now towards where we want it to be.
Okay. Et, KT, KT, KDT, beliefs, similarity, energy. Let's make it concrete. The paper uses MNES digits, right?
Yeah, a classic example.
Well,
Imagine training a model to recognize handwritten digits. Let's say it's learning the digit 4.
okay.
If it sees a new picture of a 4 and updates, its confidence that future 4s are 4s goes up. Pretty straightforward.
Right. Learns the right thing.
But here's the interesting bit, linked to that KT similarity. What if it then sees a 9?
A 9. How does that affect the 4?
Well, to the model, especially early on, a 9 might look kind of similar to a 4, right? They share some visual features.
Yeah, I can see that.
So even though the model is processing a 9, that update, because of the similarity, KT, might actually give a slight boost to its confidence in predicting 4 for that 9 image, even though 9 is the correct label there. It's like a pull-up effect spilling over.
Wow, okay. So similarity can make it learn slightly the wrong thing, or at least associate unrelated things.
In a way, yes. And conversely, if it sees a 0, which looks very different from a 4, the update on 0 will have almost no impact on its 4 predictions. The KT would be small.
I see. So the influence depends heavily on this internal similarity measure.
Absolutely. And now imagine this happening over thousands of training steps. That's the accumulated change to get this pairing effect. If the model keeps seeing 4s and 9s and it thinks they're similar, updates on one reinforce the other.
So it might end up being overly confident about 9s when it sees a 4?
Precisely. The paper showed plots where, when predicting 4s, the average probability assigned to 9 actually got a noticeable bump because of this accumulated similarity effect. The model's internal view links them.
That's fascinating from just digits. But applying this to LLMs, that sounds like a huge leap in complexity.
Oh, it is. Language is messy. You've got incredibly high dimensions.
Yeah.
Everything's sequential. The meaning depends on the order of words, unlike classifying a single-digit image. Tokens depend on each other.
And you have different training methods, too, not just simple classification.
Exactly. SFT, DPO, RLHF. It's a more complex landscape.
So how does this framework adapt?
Well, they handle the sequential part with something called causal masking. It's a technical trick, but it basically lets them analyze the language problem in a way that looks like a multi-label classification task and making the math attractable.
Okay, clever. And what about the different training methods like SFT versus DPO?
Good question. The framework adapts the adaptation energy term, GT, for supervised fine-tuning, SFT, where you just show the model the correct or chosen answer.
Like, this is the good response.
Right. The G is simply the difference between the model's current prediction and that desired chosen response, Y
Yeah.
plus U. It's a direct pull towards the target.
Simple enough. What about DPO?
Direct preference optimization, DPO, is different. Remember, it gets pairs, a preferred Y plus U and a rejected U response.
Ah, yes, the good and the bad example.
So here, G gets more complicated. It applies two forces simultaneously, a pull-up on the preferred Y plus U and a push-down on the rejected U.
Pulling towards the good, pushing away from the bad.
Makes sense.
And there's a nuance. The strength of these pushes and pulls is moderated by a margin. If the model already clearly prefers Y plus U over U, it doesn't push or pull as hard. It saves energy when things are already well separated.
Interesting subtlety. Okay, so this brings us to that puzzling observation you mentioned earlier, the confidence decreasing during DPO, even for the good answers. Exactly. This was seen in prior work and confirmed here. With SFT, the confidence in the chosen answer, Y plus U, usually goes up, maybe stabilizes. But with DPO, often the confidence in both Y plus U and U goes down.
Wait, both? How is that even possible? If probability has to sum to 1, where is it all going?
That's the million-dollar question, and the answer lies in what the paper calls the squeezing effect.
The squeezing effect. Okay, tell me about this.
It's a phenomenon that happens when you impose a large negative gradient on any model outputting a distribution with a softmax head, which is what LLMs do to get probabilities over the next token.
So that strong push-down pressure on the rejected response in DPO triggers this.
Precisely. That's the key trigger. Now, what happens during squeezing? There are guarantees and trends.
Okay, guarantees first.
Guarantee number 1, the confidence of the rejected response, the thing you're pushing down on, will decrease. That's by design.
Makes sense.
Guarantee number 2, this is the kicker. Where does that probability mass go? It gets squeezed primarily into the output dimension that was already the most probable before the update happened.
So the rich get richer, the most likely token prediction just gets even more likely.
Essentially, yes. That's the core of the squeezing effect. The probability mass lost from U disproportionately benefits the pre-update winner.
Huh. Okay, what about the trends?
Trend 1. Generally, dimensions that started with high probability tend to increase, while those that started low tend to decrease.
Okay.
Trend 2. If the initial probability distribution is very peaky, meaning the model is already very confident about one or a few outputs and assigns tiny probabilities to everything else, which is common for pre-trained LLMs,
Right, they often know the next likely word.
then the squeezing effect is stronger. Only the very top prediction gets richer, and almost everything else, including potentially the preferred response Y plus U, might actually lose probability mass.
Whoa. So a spiky distribution makes the squeezing worse for everything except the peak.
Exactly. And trend 3. If the rejected response that you're pushing down on was already very unlikely according to the model,
Which it often might be if it's a bad response.
right, then the squeezing effect is exacerbated. Pushing down on something already in the probability valley causes an even more severe decrease in confidence for most other outputs.
So DPO, by design, pushes down on you. If U is often unlikely, and LLMs often have peaky distributions, then DPO is basically set up to trigger this widespread confidence drop via squeezing.
That seems to be exactly what the analysis suggests.
How did they verify all this experimentally? It sounds complex to track.
They did quite extensive experiments. They used models like Pythia and Quen, trained on big preference data sets like Anthropic HH and Ultra Feedback.
Standard setups.
Yeah, but crucially, they created a special probing data set. It contained not just the chosen Y plus U and rejected U responses from the training data, but also things like rephrases of both, totally irrelevant sentences, even random token sequences.
Why add all that extra stuff?
To see how the confidence changed for all sorts of outputs during training, not just the ones directly involved in the updates, it let them really observe the ripple effects.
Smart. And what did they find? Did it back up the theory?
It really did. First, that assumption about the similarity measure KT being relatively stable, broadly confirmed across different models and training stages.
Okay, good baseline.
But here's something really wild they found when looking at the similarity KT between different probe sentences.
Yeah.
Responses generated by ChatGPT, even if they were semantically different, like a
Oh.
chosen answer versus a rejected one versus a rephrase, were all considered very similar to each other by the fine-tuned LLM.
Wait, the LLM thought all ChatGPT outputs looked alike, regardless of content.
From its internal perspective, measured by KT, yes, it suggests models might develop a kind of stylistic fingerprint that overrides semantic differences in this similarity calculation. It's quite fascinating.
That is fascinating, like an unintended bias towards a certain style. What about DPO and squeezing?
Confirm that too. Unlike SFT, where Y plus U confidence usually climbs, in DPO, the Y plus U confidence didn't increase nearly as much.
Yeah.
And confidence in other related responses, like refreezes of Y plus U, also decreased. But the big confirmation was the effect of pushing down on U.
The rejected response.
That strong negative gradient caused confidence to drop across almost all the probe responses, chosen, rejected, rephrases, everything. It directly showed that squeezing effect dominating, pushing probability mass only to the very peak prediction and reducing it elsewhere.
So the experimental evidence really lines up with the theory. What stands out most to you from these findings?
For me, it's that demonstration of how pushing down on one rejected answer can negatively impact the confidence of so many other potential outputs, even good ones. It really shows the downside of that strong negative gradient in DPO, especially when hitting unlikely responses.
Yeah, that's powerful. It suggests a potential bottleneck, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The analysis points to imposing big negative gradients on the value region, pushing down on already unlikely stuff as a key issue for methods like DPO.
So if that's the problem, does this understanding suggest a solution?
It does. And it's a beautifully simple, if slightly counterintuitive idea based directly on these dynamics.
Okay, let's hear it.
The proposal is to modify the first phase of training, the supervised fine-tuning SFT phase.
Before DPO even starts.
Exactly. The idea is to augment the SFT dataset. Normally in SFT, you just train on the chosen responses, X, Y plus U.
Right.
The proposal is to also include the rejected responses, X, Y, U, in the SFT dataset, treating them as if they were desired outputs during that initial phase.
Wait, train the model to imitate the bad responses during SFT. That sounds wrong. Why would you do that?
It sounds wrong, but think about the dynamics. SFT is good at pulling up probabilities, right? It applies a positive gradient.
Yeah.
So by temporarily pulling up the probability of the rejected response during SFT, you move it out of that low probability valley region.
Ah, I think I see. So you get to the DPO phase later.
Exactly. When DPO then applies its strong negative gradient to you, it's pushing down on something that's now in a higher probability region. It's not pushing into the valley anymore.
And that avoids the extreme squeezing effect.
That's the hypothesis. By giving you a little boost first, the subsequent pushdown in DPO is less likely to trigger that drastic confidence drop across the board. It should restrain the squeezing.
That's clever. Kind of like preemptively lifting something up so you don't have to push down quite so hard or into such a problematic zone later. Did it work?
It seems so. The experiments showed this augmented SFT approach significantly restrained the squeezing effect. They measured something called argmax probability, the confidence in the single most likely token, and it was lower at the end of DPO training with this method.
Lower confidence in the top token suggests less squeezing, right? Because probability isn't being overly concentrated there.
Exactly. But the really compelling part was human evaluation.
The ultimate test.
They had humans compare responses from models trained the standard SFT then DPO way versus models trained with this augmented SFT then DPO method. They used preference judges like GPT 3.5 Turbo and Claude 3 Haiku.
Right.
The models trained with the new method achieved a substantially higher win rate. For instance, using GPT 3.5 Turbo as the judge, after 4 epochs of DPO, the standard method got about a 60.45% win rate.
Yeah.
The augmented SFT method, 69.28%. That's a big jump in alignment with human preferences.
Wow, nearly a 9 percentage point improvement just by adding rejected samples to the initial SFT phase. That's pretty remarkable.
It really is. It demonstrates a clear improvement in alignment, seemingly by mitigating that squeezing effect identified through the dynamic analysis.
So we've taken quite a journey here. From the basic idea of tracking step-by-step changes through digit recognition into the complexities of LLMs, uncovering this weird squeezing effect, and landing on a surprisingly simple, counterintuitive trick that seems to genuinely improve how well these models align with what we want.
Yeah, and I think it underscores that understanding these underlying dynamics isn't just an academic exercise. It gives real insights into why models behave strangely sometimes.
Right.
And provides concrete ideas for making them better, more robust, and more aligned with human values.
It really shifts the perspective from just looking at the final performance
Yeah.
to understanding the process. So here's a final thought to leave you with. If a subtle change way back in the SFT phase, like temporarily teaching the model the wrong answers, can have such a positive downstream effect on alignment by tweaking these dynamics, what other counterintuitive aha moments are waiting to be discovered in how we train these incredibly complex AI systems? And how might uncovering them completely change how we build and interact with AI in the future?